What if the neighbors you trust the most are hiding a secret so dark it could shatter your entire world? Imagine waking up in a bustling city one morning only to discover that a house right next to yours, a house filled with familiar faces, has suddenly gone silent. No voices, no movement, no signs of life, just an eerie stillness. This wasn't an abandoned home, but one where laughter, religious rituals, and everyday chatter once echoed. In July 2023, the people of Ludhiana's New Janakpuri locality found themselves at the center of a story so chilling that even the bravest would hesitate to step inside that house again. In this quiet yet tightly packed neighborhood lived three senior citizens: a 90-year-old mother, her 72-year-old son, and his 70-year-old wife. Their names were known to almost everyone around: Surendra Kaur, lovingly called Bachan Kaur, her son Chaman Lal, and her daughter-in-law Surendra Kaur. Their family was scattered across the globe. 4 children lived abroad, some in France, others in Italy, New Zealand, and the UK. Life seemed stable, and financially they lacked nothing. Rental properties and support from their children made sure the old couple never had to worry about money. Yet sometimes prosperity and peace make others envious, and sometimes they create targets. The morning of July 7th began like any other in the busy neighborhood. A milkman arrived, as he did every day, ringing the bell and knocking on the door, but strangely no one answered. He tried again at the side entrance, calling out for Chaman Lal, but the silence remained. This was not the first day. Just the day before, July 6th, the family hadn't responded either. The milkman's voice, growing louder and more impatient, caught the attention of a neighbor woman. She stepped out, took the family's share of milk as she occasionally did when they traveled, and assured the milkman that perhaps they had gone out, but deep inside she too found it unusual. They never disappeared without a word. By July 7th, whispers spread. The same neighbor noticed that the milk from July 6th still lay untouched inside the house. Something was wrong. Another domestic helper had also knocked repeatedly the day before, with no response. The last anyone had seen of the family was on the evening of July 5th. It had been a warm night, and the 3 elders had sat outside chatting happily with neighbors, laughing and sharing small stories as they often did. After sunset, they had gone back inside. That was the last moment anyone in the neighborhood remembered seeing them alive. Since then, no one had seen them step outside, and curiously, there was no lock on the gate, only a latch secured from the inside. The unease grew heavier when neighbors gathered around the house. They rang the bell again, pounded on the doors, but no one came. A faint smell lingered in the air, sharp and disturbing, something like leaking gas. Some residents climbed over the boundary wall and entered the yard. Inside, the smell was stronger, making everyone's heart race. They rushed to open the gate from within so others could enter. Together, the neighbors attempted to force the main door open, and after a struggle, it finally gave way. What awaited them inside was the kind of nightmare that scars a community forever. The rooms were in disarray, furniture disturbed, cupboards left open, papers scattered across the floor. As they stepped further inside, the scene turned horrifying. In one of the bedrooms lay the lifeless bodies of 3 people: Chaman Lal's mother, his wife, and Chaman Lal himself. 2 were on the bed and 1 was on the floor, all soaked in blood. The walls and floors were splattered red, as though the room itself had witnessed unimaginable brutality. Shocked screams filled the air, neighbors rushing back out in disbelief, trembling, their minds unable to process the carnage in a house they had walked past every single day. Police were immediately called. Within minutes, the Salem Tabri police station dispatched officers to the site. Soon, higher officials, politicians, and even media crews swarmed the lane. The crime scene was gruesome, but it also raised more questions than answers. It seemed like a burglary at first glance. After all, cupboards had been opened and items thrown around. Yet valuable jewelry and cash were still inside, untouched. Only papers and trivial objects were disturbed. Why would a burglar kill 3 people in cold blood and then not even steal? Something about this didn't add up. In the kitchen, investigators discovered a crucial detail. The gas cylinder's knob had been deliberately left open, and the pipe connecting it was cut. Near the living room, they found the remnants of an incense stick, burnt to ash. It didn't take long for the police to piece together a chilling possibility. Whoever had done this wanted the house to explode, to burn so completely that all evidence of murder would vanish. The killer had hoped people would assume it was an accidental fire caused by gas leakage. But fate had other plans. The cylinder had little gas left, and the incense stick's flame never shed the gas. What remained instead was a house filled with the evidence of calculated murder. Even stranger, all the doors were locked from the inside. No forced entry, no broken windows. How had the killer entered, and more importantly, how had they left? The only possible explanation was the roof. Several houses in that lane shared adjoining terraces. Walls separating the roofs were low, easy to cross. From there, one could slip in quietly and perhaps leave without ever touching the front door. This detail planted a seed of suspicion in the minds of police. Could this be the work of a neighbor? As the news spread, the family's children abroad were informed and their world crumbled. They rushed to book flights back to India while other relatives from nearby villages gathered in Ludhiana. Everyone had the same question. Who could hate these gentle religious people enough to butcher them? Surendra Kaur had been a regular at a local shrine, offering food and service to worshippers. Surendra Kaur often visited temples, praying sincerely. Chaman Lal was respected and soft-spoken. Neighbors recalled no bitter enmities, no violent feuds. It made no sense. Yet the fact remained. 3 bodies brutally slain in a house locked from within. Detectives now faced a puzzle as bizarre as it was horrifying. A murder scene staged like a robbery, a failed attempt to cause an explosion, and a killer who seemed to vanish into thin air. And yet, as the police studied CCTV cameras nearby, an unsettling pattern began to emerge. In one corner of the footage, they saw a familiar figure. A man spraying water on the street, pausing near Chaman Lal's gate, peeking inside again and again. His actions seemed innocent on the surface, but why was he so interested in that house on the very morning the bodies were discovered? The CCTV footage was both ordinary and unsettling. On one hand, it showed common neighborhood life, residents passing by, the milkman delivering, a woman briefly stopping at the gate. On the other hand, one man's repeated movements seemed off. He wasn't just spraying water. He was circling, pausing, bending slightly to peer inside Chaman Lal's gate. Police paused the frame. They zoomed in. The man was no stranger. He lived right next door. His name was Robin, though neighbors sometimes called him Munna. He was known as an e-rickshaw driver, a man of simple means, often seen wandering the lanes. At first glance, nothing about him screamed killer, but the more officers studied his behavior, the more questions arose. Why was he so fixated on the house where 3 people had just been slaughtered? Investigators decided to visit Robin's home. His wife was there selling incense sticks as she often did for a living. She seemed genuinely distraught over the tragedy. In fact, she cried alongside the grieving relatives, mourning the deaths as though she had lost family of her own. But where was Robin? Neighbors said he had disappeared for several hours on the day of the discovery, returning only later with the excuse that his rickshaw had broken down. To the police, this was convenient. Too convenient. They quietly brought him into custody for questioning. After all, he was the one person with both access and opportunity. At the station, Robin tried to act calm. He claimed he was simply watering the road to keep dust from rising. He insisted he respected the elderly couple and their mother, that he had no reason to harm them. But the investigators weren't convinced. They pressed harder, pointing out the CCTV images, asking why he kept looking inside the house. His answers grew shaky. He avoided eye contact, fidgeted, and repeated himself. Finally, after hours of grilling and subtle psychological pressure, Robin broke. The words tumbled out like a flood. Yes, he confessed, it was him. He had killed them, all three. The confession sent chills down the officers' spines. They expected resistance, excuses, or denial. Instead, Robin admitted everything with startling bluntness. He said he had entered the house on the morning of July 6th, armed with a hammer. His first target was Surendra Kaur. He had waited, watching carefully from his roof until she finished her morning routine. As she returned to her room after bathing, he slipped inside and struck her from behind. She cried out, struggled, but the blow had been too strong. In moments, she collapsed, blood spreading across the floor. But the sound of her screams had awakened Chaman Lal. Horrified, Chaman Lal rushed into the room only to find Robin standing there with bloodied hands and a hammer. There was no turning back. To silence the witness, Robin swung again, crushing Chaman Lal's head. The old man fell to the floor, lifeless. For a second, Robin considered escaping, but fate had other ideas. In the next room, 90-year-old Bachan Kaur had been startled awake by the commotion. She turned on the light, and her frail eyes widened at the sight of her son and daughter-in-law lying in pools of blood. Robin saw the terror in her eyes. He panicked. If she raised an alarm, the neighborhood would swarm. He ran toward her, delivering one final brutal strike. She collapsed onto her bed, her blood soaking into the sheets. The brutality of the act left even hardened officers shaken. But Robin wasn't finished. He told police how he dragged the elderly woman's body back to the main room, placing it beside her daughter-in-law. He staged the scene to appear like a robbery gone wrong, scattering papers and leaving cupboards open. Then, he admitted, he lit an incense stick and placed it near the gas cylinder after cutting its pipe. He wanted the house to burn, to erase all signs of his crime, but when the fire never sparked, he returned, pretending to water the road, checking nervously again and again to see if his deadly plan had succeeded. The confession matched the evidence perfectly, yet one question still lingered. Why? Why kill 3 harmless elders in cold blood? Officers raided Robin's house and found damning proof: the blood-stained hammer, his torn and washed clothes, even Chaman Lal's stolen phone, stripped of its SIM card, all hidden clumsily. They also found a camera, cassettes, and a briefcase he had taken during the staged robbery. Forensics confirmed traces of blood on the hammer and clothes. There was no doubt left. Robin was the killer. Within just 12 hours of discovering the bodies, police had solved the case, turning suspicion into solid evidence and confession. But while the police considered the case closed, for the people of Ludhiana, the nightmare had just begun. Because if a man could kill 3 elders over nothing more than wounded pride, what did that say about the hidden darkness inside ordinary neighbors? What did it say about the fragility of trust in tightly knit communities? And most importantly, was Robin's explanation the whole truth, or was there still more buried in the shadows? The courtroom of public opinion in Ludhiana was already in session long before Robin would ever face a judge. To the neighbors, the family he killed were not just names in a police file. They were elders, guides, familiar faces they had seen for decades. The shock waves of betrayal ran deep. Robin wasn't some distant criminal who had crept in from outside. He was a man they saw every day, a man who lived just a few steps away. He had borrowed tools, greeted them casually, shared smiles with his wife by his side. To imagine that this same man could sneak into the house of 3 frail seniors and bludgeon them to death shook the very foundation of neighborhood trust. As the police laid out the evidence, the story became more chilling. The hammer Robin used was retrieved, still carrying microscopic traces of blood despite his desperate attempt to clean it. His clothes, though washed, had faint spots identified by forensic tests. And the stolen objects, the phone, tapes, and camera tied him directly to the crime. Every detail he confessed matched the crime scene. The gas cylinder left open, the incense stick burnt down to ash, the scattered papers meant to mimic robbery, all of it aligned perfectly. It wasn't a random act of violence. It was premeditated, planned with a cold determination, triggered by nothing more than wounded pride. Yet what haunted people most was not just the brutality of the killings, but the pettiness of the motive. How could a casual taunt about not having children escalate into a triple homicide? Many shook their heads, insisting there had to be more. Surely a man does not destroy 3 lives and his own over a few words. But the more they learned about Robin's psychology, the clearer it became. His marriage was 5 years old, his age was 42, and the absence of children gnawed at his sense of identity. Every time Surendra commented, he felt stripped of his masculinity. It wasn't just teasing, it was, in his fragile mind, public humiliation. The irony was bitter. Surendra's remarks were likely casual, perhaps even affectionate in tone, not meant to wound so deeply. In many communities, such questions, "When will you have a child?" are common, often asked without thinking. But to Robin, who lived with his own silent frustrations, they became knives twisting in his pride. On the morning of July 6th, when she once again mentioned it as he fed his chickens, his restraint broke. He didn't just want to shut her up, he wanted to erase the humiliation forever, and in doing so, he set in motion an irreversible tragedy. The police, in their final report, highlighted this as a warning. Words can be harmless to one but deadly to another. Society often underestimates how repeated taunts, even casual ones, can fester into rage. Robin's crime, while rooted in his personal weakness, reflected a larger truth, that human ego, when bruised repeatedly, can turn monstrous. The officers admitted they had rarely seen a case so brutal with a motive so small. It was as if Robin had carried the weight of those words for years, and when he struck with the hammer, he was not just attacking Surendra, but every voice that had mocked him in his life. But now, his fate was sealed. The case against him was airtight. Police were confident he would face the harshest punishment possible, death penalty. For Robin, there would be no sympathy. Even in his confession, he showed no true remorse, no tears for the lives he had ended. The only flicker of concern he showed was for his wife, asking police to jail her alongside him so she wouldn't be left alone. The request was twisted, selfish in its own way. He had destroyed her world, left her branded as the wife of a murderer. Yet the community surprisingly stood by her. They promised she would not face cruelty for something she had not done. This rare show of compassion contrasted sharply with the cruelty of the crime. Neighbors reminded one another that the woman had always been kind to the victims. She had even pleaded with Chaman Lal to stop smoking, treating him like her own father. To punish her for her husband's sins would be unjust. The tragedy had already stolen too much from too many. At the very least, the wife would be spared further suffering. In this way, the community slowly began to heal, rallying around innocence in the shadow of guilt. Meanwhile, the victims' relatives from abroad finally arrived. Their grief was unbearable. To lose parents and grandmother in such a savage way, while being so far away, tore them apart. They could not believe that the very neighbor who smiled at their family had been the killer. The funeral became a moment of reckoning for the neighborhood. Thousands gathered not just to mourn, but to reaffirm their collective fear that evil can sometimes wear the most familiar face. The wails of mourning women, the quiet sobs of men, the shaking heads of children too young to understand, all blended into a silence heavier than words. For the city of Ludhiana, the case closed quickly on paper, but not in memory. The story of the new Janakpuri murders became a grim reminder etched into every mind, that behind closed doors, behind ordinary faces, darkness can thrive unnoticed, that anger left unchecked can explode without warning, and that sometimes the smallest words can lead to the bloodiest ends. Police declared the case solved within 12 hours, but solving it did not erase the horror. It only gave it a frame, a name, and a face. Robin, the neighbor no one suspected until it was too late. And yet, even with all evidence presented, one question lingers in the air, haunting like a whisper in the silence of the street. Was this truly just about a few taunts, or was there a deeper darkness in Robin's heart that no one will ever uncover? Could there be hidden grudges, secret desires, or unspoken failures that pushed him beyond reason? Perhaps we will never know. But the question remains for all of us. How well do we really know the people living just next door?